I used to live at 111 First Street in Jersey City, New Jersey, inside the old P.J. Lorillard pencil factory. The colossal building was claimed to have been at one point a teddy bear factory, and prior to that it was also, at some point, a tobacco processing plant. The walls were sticky sweet, smelled of lead and leaf, and when the roof leaked, which it always did, our walls would bleed in trails of tar. The building was apparently owned by Goldman, and the Goldmans were a part of a kind of Jewish mafia, I understood, and he, or they, owned a number of buildings around Jersey City and in the city. 111 First Street just happened to be one of them. It took up a whole city block, built in brick, 5 floors, and we lived on the 5th floor, renting a studio from an artist, Bill Burrell, whose paintings resembled red grooms. Bill wasn't painting as much anymore, and he wanted to use only the top part of the space to store his paintings, and rent out the rest, for $720 a month. It was the only place we could afford in New York, or shall we say within earshot of New York, because it was Jersey City, New Jersey, and not Greenpoint or Dumbo. It was just over the river, though, just a quick trip on the PATH train, which ran from Journal Square in New Jersey into the city, with a stop underneath the World Trade Center. And it went all the way to 33rd Street. Cost $1. And I remember the conductor on the way out would announce the upcoming stops. Newport! Grove Street will be next. Watch the doors, please. Our new home was pretty much a raw space. I had to build everything. Install everything undercover because you weren't supposed to live there. But everybody did. I built an innocuous kitchenette with a toaster and double hot plate. I carved out a secret door to a space underneath Bill's loft where I built a bedroom, or shall we say sleeping area, as it was just a mattress on the floor. And then I built a bathroom catty-corner to it, with a shower, sink, and a toilet. All the while living in constant fear of being discovered, because as I said, you weren't supposed to live there. But even the mayor of Jersey City, old Brett Schindler himself, knew we were all living there. How could he not? I remember buying a 15-gallon water heater and sneaking it up the freight elevator on a cart one afternoon, which was risky. I hid it under the stairs going up to Bill's space. I remember hooking it all up with the plumbing late at night, taking every precaution so that we weren't discovered. I finally tapped into the water line, drilling some holes into the floor to the 4th floor hallway, teeing into the sewer line, which was really disgusting. I prayed that someone didn't flush. Well, somehow word got around quickly that in the building that I put in some plumbing for our space. Maybe the fellow downstairs leaked it because I did spill some water through the floorboards into his space on the 4th floor. I heard him yell out, "What the?" So then I had to go down there to apologize. But yeah, everybody knew. There were a lot of Russians living at 111 First Street. The way it worked was the husband would usually come over to the States first, try to set up a room or space for his family, and then they would come and join him later. One Russian, who just went by the name of Sasha, lived on the 2nd floor. Apparently he was in the chicken business, a kind of Russian mafia. He had an enormous space with a pool table, as well as enough room for a motorcycle. Sometimes he would get drunk and ride his bike in the hallways and down the stairs. It was really loud. You could even hear it from the 5th floor. I remember once he got so drunk that he fell asleep right outside his door to his space, keys still in his hand. Just couldn't make it. Upon learning of my plumbing expertise, soon I had knocks from Russians on my door on the 5th floor. With a bottle of vodka, of course. When I'd open the door, they'd ask, "Are you Andrew?" And I would say, "Yes." And then they would hand me a bottle. "Drink! Let's have a drink! You do my plumbing!" It's like only 10:30 in the morning. "Let's have a drink! You do my plumbing, friend!" And just like that, I had a little side business of doing plumbing for Russian families living illegally in the P.J. Lorillard pencil factory in Jersey City, New Jersey. I remember the day I got another knock on my door. When I opened it, it was an older bearded man who said, "Andrew, I am Slava. I need your help." Slava didn't bring any vodka that day, which I found unusual, but I don't think he really drank anymore, and honestly I don't even think he had the money to buy some anyway. He had arrived with barely anything, and now all he wanted to do was make some living. till his daughter got there, and maybe she was here already. I was unclear. But all I know is that he needed a place to live, and fast. He told me he was working in a Christmas decoration factory in Newark someplace, or I think it was in Brooklyn. "I make ornament for the Christmas," he said. I learned later that Slava was a designer back in Leningrad, but over here he was making crappy things out of pine cones, glitter, and hot glue, like some things you'd find at Christmas tree shops. That store didn't even exist back then. Then Slava showed me to where his space was downstairs, down a hallway I'd never been to, and I'd never even been to this part of the second floor. He led me into what was a very small, dark room with a tiny window overlooking a courtyard. A deep cavern filled with garbage on top of an industrial graveyard. Oh, all that machinery. "This is home," he said after unlocking the door and closing it behind us, not before peering up the hallway to ensure that no one had seen us. Slava then told me that he was renting home from manager, which was not all that surprising to me, as there were two so-called managers at 111. There was Ralph, a gruff, balding, middle-aged man with a comb-over, and his shiny Italian leather shoes. And then there was Shamir. These two sketchy creatures certainly weren't going to tell Goldman, or anybody else for that matter, about the unrented units. It happened all the time where they would take advantage, letting a space that looked to be empty on the outside, but it was actually being rented on the inside. Under the table, of course. There was even a rumor going around that Ralph had sex with one of the tenants because he couldn't pay the rent. And Ralph ran the show, but Shamir was more of the footman. He was a small, smeary-like man, kind of oily, and it seemed like Shamir was always lurking somewhere around the building, roaming the hallways, watching. Making sure. When I began working secretly on Slava's space, it wasn't long before there was a knock on his door. I didn't answer. And then there was another knock. I still didn't answer. I had an uneasy feeling. It was Shamir. I could feel his oily presence. I was almost positive it was him. And then I heard him slunk away. And when I thought the coast was clear, I got out of there and came back another day. Then, just as before, as soon as I began, I heard another knock on the door, much louder this time. I didn't answer. And then I heard the jingling of keys, a Jersey accent, and the turning of the armature of the lock. Then I heard a pop. I had installed a kind of deadbolt on the door, a 2x4 screwed into the wall over the door frame. Whoever it was now couldn't get in. I didn't make a sound for what seemed like an eternity, and then I went out the window into the courtyard, home, back to the 5th floor. That night I hardly slept, but I did wake from a dream that it was Slava coming home, and he was unable to get in. But wouldn't he have said something? And Slava didn't have a Jersey accent. Thinking back, we should have had a code word or something to say, "It's me, let me in." But who was it then? Was it Shamir? I simply didn't know. It was then I came to the conclusion that I was going to do everything on Slava's space extremely late at night. He sometimes didn't get home from making Christmas until 6 in the morning anyway, so this worked out perfectly. Slava would say, "Andrew, I earned the extra money for the night." In a couple of weeks' time, with this routine, I was finished. The hot plate on a cart, the hideaway shower with roll-away, lockable casters, the toilet which could be hid under a large plywood sculpture stand that I had found in the hallway on the 5th floor. It was kind of a building swap shop, if you will, where tenants would leave things that they thought somebody else could use. It was there I found a mini fridge for Slava. It was only missing the power cord. So I found one on an old air conditioner in the courtyard of machinery. Oh, all that machinery. It was the perfect score. Slava had the day off from work one day, so we christened the kitchen. Slava made me a Russian dinner with some potatoes and some kind of green vegetable. Could have been kale, but it didn't taste like it. Tasted like butter, too, but he assured me there was none. Just some dill. Slava talked while we ate about how his mother used to make everything in just one pot. It all seemed so simple. After dinner, Slava said, "I want to show you something," where he brought out an album and pulled the record out of the relic cardboard sleeve, and then laid the record on top of a phonograph that looked relatively magnificent in that crude space. Slava had inventively put the phonograph upon the sculpture stand, which was now, of course, presiding over his hidden toilet. I asked him, "Where'd you get this?" and he said, "Andrew, I have friend." And then he told me a story. "This recorder one of few things brought me when I left my country." He held it gently in his hands at the edges, gazing at it. "Greatest Russian singer. Name Vadim Kozan. Like, Frank Sinatra. This was my mother's when I play. I think of her. My mother said, Kozan, he was the best." We listened to the record, the room filled with sound. At one point I was afraid that there would be a knock on the door, and we would be discovered. But soon I was lost in the music. This incredible sadness, yet beautiful tenor voice. I was so swept up in the music, and even though I couldn't understand the words, I knew, or at least had some sense of what the songs were about. That even amongst so much hardship, there is hope. I later learned that Kozan was in fact a Russian equivalent of Frank Sinatra, maybe even better. And before and during World War II, he was very sought after for his performances. Although in Russia they were putting away their artists, musicians, and intelligentsia, anyone that would challenge the authority of Stalin. Kozan would eventually be banished to a labor camp in Siberia, not for being a musician, mind you, but for none other than being openly gay. There were so many who spent their lives in these camps in Siberia, but even in exile, Vadim was still sought after for his extraordinary talent. Stalin even flew him to Yalta for a few hours to perform for Winston Churchill and other statesmen during the break at the Yalta Conference in 1945. Apparently, the other leaders were completely unaware of Kozan's fate. Apparently. Vadim Kozin would live the rest of his life in exile. Although Kozin was released from camps in 1950, he died in Magadan at the age of 91. He forever became known as the tenor of Magadan. After the record was over, Slava turned to me and said, "Now I'm going to make drink." And he went over to the hot plate and boiled some water in a small carafe, and then he poured it over some coffee and let it sit. And then he drew the curtain of the kitchen cart and opened the door to the mini fridge. He turned to me and smiled and said, "Thanks to you, I have cream." I sat in the little room sipping coffee, looking at what was now a new beginning for Slava. And when I went home that night, I was feeling good about my place in the world and about my new friend. I didn't see him for like a week after that, and I remember going down to the second floor one day to see if he was home. The hallway was extremely dark and smelled of cigar and cologne. When I got to the door, it was open. It was where I had wished we had had a secret knock or something, because when I looked inside, there was nothing. It was as if he was never there. A couple months passed, and I came home one day to the light of my answering machine blinking. I played back the message. The voice on the tape said, "Hello, Andrew? This is Slava. I am not dead." And that was the last I ever saw or heard from him again.
Дружба,